One. What's up, party people? It's your host, Sunny Ray, for Building on Bitcoin. Today, I'm joined by an old and dear friend, Andre. Andre, how you doing, bud?
Doing well. How you doing, Sunny?
I am well. I'm well. I like to normally kick it off by sharing where you and I first met. I think you'd sponsored one of my events back in the day,
That's
correct?
right. This is back in 2018 now, almost a decade ago,
Oh my
man.
God, time
I know.
flies.
I
You
know.
remember that? You guys had those Bitcoin ATM machines set
That's
up.
right.
People were
Those
going wild.
ATMs,
What was the
yeah.
price of Bitcoin at that conference?
Oh
Any
my God, man. I remember it was like I remember it was 800, I think, in like late 20 or early 2017. So when we met, must have been like around 1500.
Damn.
1500. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, I remember those days still. It's
Remember
I
the
buddy,
Sheraton?
yeah, the Sheraton. I remember I owed a buddy some cash for like a plane ticket he bought, and I said, and we settled in Bitcoin. And obviously
Worst
in
mistake ever.
that whatever $1,000 plane ticket cost me like 120 grand now. But
Don't,
what are
don't
you
do the
what,
math.
what are
Don't
you
do the
gonna do,
math.
right?
I think my father-in-law actually bought a little bit of Bitcoin from your machine.
Oh
So
yeah,
yep,
that's
yep, yep.
fun.
It's
That's
always cool. I like Bitcoin ATMs because it makes it a little bit more real.
those were the
Grounds.
wild days. Those
Yeah,
were
I
the
know you guys
wild
kind of stopped doing that after a while. But anyways, we're gonna get into the story. We're gonna talk about obviously APX lending, and you're making waves in this Bitcoin lending space now. We're gonna talk about Coinberry and your acquisition, which you did a couple years ago. And we're talking about Bitcoin, but I always like to begin with, kind of like the man behind all of this, right? So tell people a little bit maybe about your background before you got into Bitcoin. Where were you born? I don't know.
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
did you
sure.
study?
So I was born in Moscow, Russia. I left when I was around 8. So I grew up in
Okay.
Canada, but I remember, I always had this like entrepreneurial spark in me. And I remember back when I was like 12, 13, going back to visit my grandma, and she had an orchard, so I would like pick apples and plums in her orchard, at the age of 12 or whatever, and then take them to the local market to sell them. So you'd have me standing there all day long, and I remember it was so much fun. And in hindsight, I can't believe my parents let me do that because like this is back in the day where you could like cross train tracks and like hike for half an hour to get to the market. And to let like a 12-year-old kid do that with a basket of whatever plums and apples, it's wild, like looking back now. But I've always had sort of that, like affinity towards entrepreneurial ventures, and so that would probably my first one was when I was 12, selling those apples and plums.
Oh, I
And
love that. I love
back
that.
then,
That is
yeah.
cool. So then what? When did you move from there to Canada?
Yeah, so then, well, so I grew up in Canada. I mean, I went to, middle school, high school here. I went to U of T, got my engineering degree, worked a bit in like systems and algorithm design. But I always, like I said, I always had this like affinity towards business. So I went back to school, got my MBA at Schulich, here in Toronto. And then when I graduated, this was like 2010. I don't know if you recall back then, but we had the marketing, the housing crisis situation. So I ended up randomly getting a job out of Montreal. Moved to Montreal, lived there for about 7 years, up until 2017, which is when I co-founded Coinberry and moved back to Toronto. And I remember visiting Toronto like in 2015, 2016, and just there was so much happening. There was so much energy here. And you could just see the city was like being built up so vibrantly compared to at least Montreal back then, back like 10 years ago. And I remember thinking to myself, I need to move back because like things are happening in Toronto. And then obviously getting into the crypto scene, that was like a whole world of its own, and that
So,
was just
so
wild.
before you got into crypto, what were you working on? You said
So I was, yeah, after I finished my MBA, I was in like strategic supply chain, business consulting, like those kind of roles.
okay.
So I had, but before, but fundamentally my like corporate experience was Prior to my MBA was in systems and algorithm design, and then after that was more or less business consulting. So you combine those two things, and it's a really sort of a perfect storm kind of situation for getting into crypto.
Talk about that a little bit. Sorry, you studied, what did you say? Systems design? That sounds super interesting.
Yeah, so I worked for a company. So I finished my engineering degree. So I did electrical engineering at UFT.
Okay.
Graduated, found a job at a company. They designed ERP systems for steel mills.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
so there's just as a side story, there's several methods of getting like steel and iron ore. And one of those is through just open, pit mining, like when you actually mine the ore out of the ground and you melt it down, whatever, into steel products. And then the other one is when you take scrap metal and you melt it down, and then you melt it down, you add whatever chemical additives, and then you build, you basically create new steel products from that. And that's like, these are still massive like industrial complexes, but compared to the mining operations, they're considered like mini steel mills. And there's a bunch of them all around Canada and all around US, because believe it or not, there's actually a lot of scrap metal that, cars that come old, buildings that get torn down, all sorts of things. So all of that scrap metal gets melted again, like kind of refurbished and made into new steel, like for whatever cars again or building or whatever. So the company I worked for created ERP software for these industrial complexes that basically refurbished this steel, the scrap metal. And so I worked for them for a couple of years, and it was a really cool experience, because it really taught me a lot about, again, like algorithm design, and analyzing like the process. In this case, it was the process of remelting scrap steel, but regardless, like analyzing a manufacturing process and then sort of turning that into a software ERP system that whatever you need to do it, track the amount of metal billets you melt in a day, whatever it is. But that was a really phenomenal experience, because they would send us on site, and as like a 22-year-old kid, that was the best fun, because you go on site for like 2 weeks into all over North America. Sometimes it was really cool spots like Florida. I remember like spending a bunch like a summer in Jacksonville in Florida, and it was just me and a bunch of other like engineering guys doing this. And so you would work obviously during the day, but then during the evening it's just a bunch of guys who go out and you party. So it was great. It was a really fun time. And I learned a lot, in that job. So shout out to Quad Infotech. Anybody watching from there? I think the company's still around, but that was a fun couple of years. But then again, like fundamentally, I always wanted to get into business. Like that was my thing. I always wanted to get back into business, and to launch my own company. That was like a life goal of mine until Coinberry. I kept trying to launch a business of my own, and funny enough, Coinberry wasn't actually the first business I launched, but it was the first successful one. But I kept trying. Like as I had full-time corporate, jobs, I always kept trying with like side businesses. And I think Coinbase was my fourth one. So the first three, you know,
And just curious, so if you go back to those steel mill days, right? So what was kind of your view of money? Like, did you have one? Did you have a thesis? Was it kind of just like it's just
Oh,
something to
I
get
think back,
by? Like,
yeah, I mean, look, I think back then, like young 20s, like trying to pay off my OSAP loan,
mm.
my view on money was my checks not, like you have a different perspective, I think, when you are like especially when you're a little bit younger and you're earning a salary, and the mentality you have of sort of that paycheck to paycheck um sort of way of looking at things is a little bit different. And to your point, being in the financial, space now for almost a decade, you really start to appreciate and have a very different perspective on how money is like created, in how it's created and sort of pumped into the economy. And you really like get a really interesting view on behind the scenes of how it all flows and works. And I don't think a lot of people sort of appreciate that on the one hand, but on the other hand, you also end up being in a bit of a bubble because everybody that I talk to is it's all about crypto and money, right? So then like you start appreciating or you stop appreciating that people have other like perspectives and like ways of living that aren't just solely focused on like how is money generated and how does like value flow between people, which is basically like what my life is now. So yeah.
And was there like a pivotal moment, or was it like a sequence of events that got you to start asking some of these deeper questions around, the traditional financial system? Because going from like
Yeah,
engineering,
man.
okay, you want to do entrepreneurship, but how do you, yeah, what was
Yeah,
kind of
tell
your
me
thought process?
yeah, that's a good question. So the business I had prior to Coinberry, which was my previous business, was a uh we were basically exporting maple syrup from so I was living in Montreal at the time, so from Quebec into like Eastern Europe and Russia specifically. But like containers worth of maple syrup. And so we would be supplying like high-end grocery stores with maple syrup in Russia. And so when you try to when you get exposure to international trade, you inadvertently get exposure to international finances and the settlement um, and movement of funds. So, we would have containers that we would be shipping off that we would be sourcing in Canadian dollars here. Obviously, selling that maple syrup in the local currency, so in the Russian ruble. So right away you're exposed to FX rates, and that whole side of things. But then also you're exposed to the extremely archaic, inefficient, and slow method of moving money around the world through wire, like sending wires. And if you have a container and it's stuck at customs and now it's a long weekend and the banks here don't work Friday and then they don't work Monday, and so you can't send a wire to, for example, clear customs, and you have a container and it's just sitting there for now 5 days, like you've incurred a lot of costs. And it's not like we had a massive operation. So if you sort of extrapolate the pain that we were going through, just the inefficiency of just literally being able to settle, international trade deals of a very small scale. But the inefficiencies like that we experienced, if you extrapolate them to, a global trade, that's why when I was exposed to Bitcoin, which was like right after this business, I was like, oh my God, like the fact that people are able to settle and move value around almost instantaneously 24/7 without being dependent on any third parties in between, like to me that was the aha moment where I was like, oh, this thing's going to be big. Just wait until sort of trading the international trading industry as a whole gets a whiff of this kind of thing. So that was, I think, my aha moment. It was in early 2017. I was with a bunch of my friends, and we were actually down in Miami, and we were there for a bachelor party. I think you've heard the story before. We're down there for a bachelor party, and at the end of the weekend, we had to settle just between ourselves as a bunch of, like, we had guys come down from the States, had a bunch of friends from Canada, and so we had to just settle tabs with each other. And it was back then it was very difficult to actually move funds from Canada to the US. Like, you either had to have a PayPal account. That was pretty much it. You had to have a PayPal account, or you had to send a wire. And so a buddy of mine at the time, he had this idea of all of us just buying Bitcoin and settling with Bitcoin. And that's why, I like earlier on, I told you about that story with a plane ticket. So I owed my buddy like $1,000 in for a plane ticket, and I settled with him in Bitcoin. But that was part of that whole experience. And so I remember we were on the beach at the time. We all signed up for Coinbase accounts, bought a little bit of Bitcoin, a little bit of crypto. Back then, you could still do with a credit card on Coinbase. I'm not sure if you can now anymore, but and that was when I thought to myself, okay, we are just a bunch of regular dudes trying to, we have this like whatever, anecdotal case of settling, a couple $100 between ourselves. But nevertheless, if you take that and you sort of extrapolate it to international business, international trade, settling, you know, shipment, the cost of, shipment goods, that's when this thing is going to get really, really big. And that's when, I sort of had that original aha moment. A couple of months later, I was approached by a couple of buddies and said, "Hey, we want to start this at the time Bitcoin ATM business. Do you want to join?" And I was working I was working for Volvo at the time out of Montreal in the corporate division. And so I took a couple of weeks off, my vacation time, came back to Toronto. We literally ordered, I think we put in like, if I'm not mistaken, like 18 grand each. And it was like four of us. So, we started with like whatever, 70. It was 9 grand each. So we started with $36,000 worth of capital and, bought, I think, three or four I think it was General Bytes. Do you remember those General Bytes ATM, Bitcoin ATM machines out of
I
like
do
the
remember.
Czech Republic or something? I think
I do remember. Yeah.
I think they got hacked like a couple of years ago, pretty bad. But back then they were like some of the best machines. So we imported like three of those. Me being having an electrical engineering background, I got them certified, like electrically certified in Canada. I think we had the only actual electrical certified Bitcoin ATM machines at the time in the country. But it was important for me to, even that early on, to do things very like by the book as it pertains to the compliance angle of things. And so we had those three machines out in Toronto. We had one in Kensington Market. I don't remember, we had the other two. That what like one at a record store, and I don't remember what the third one was. And so we would run around, put cash into these ATM machines, and people would buy Bitcoin from them. And then eventually, I thought to myself, well, okay, I this isn't exactly the career choice that I envisioned for myself. Running around in Kensington Market, putting like $20 bills into an ATM
Yeah.
machine. I was like, we need to change this up a little bit. I'm not going to be doing this for much longer. And then you also, like, truth be told, when you are in the Bitcoin ATM business, you have a certain clientele type that uses, back then, would buy Bitcoin without having to do KYC and, for cash. And so for me personally, that wasn't like exactly the client type that I was looking forward to servicing at scale, just for my own personal ethics reasons. And I also realized that if we want to scale this business up, we need to go digital. We need to go online. We need to get registered, compliant, the whole thing. So we built out our first original sort of MVP of our trading business for Coinberry, our trading platform, in it would have been late 2017, and sold the machines. So we still had one machine when you were doing um, your what do you call them,
Conference.
conferences? Thank you. And but then we sold the last one shortly thereafter. I think in early 2018 we sold them, and we went full digital with our online brokerage at Coinberry was the business at the time. And then we just went from there, man. We very early on we had the foresight of approaching the regulators and just having a discussion with them and saying, hey, listen, we want to we have this business idea, we want to do this right. We have no idea how to do this right because this doesn't exist yet. Like, this was before there's no trading platforms that were regulated back in 2017, 18. Like, so I remember going into the OSC, so the Ontario Securities Commission offices in early 2018 with our lawyers. And there was like, they had like a consortium. There were like 10 people from the OSC there. And, this was like probably the first or second conversation they had with any company in the industry. But, we ended up having a very fruitful and, to this day, I think very positive relationship with the regulators, because we took a very honest, transparent approach so early on. And so anyway, long story short, we ended up getting Coinberry to become the first crypto startup in Canada to actually get registered with the OSC and the CSA in 20, I think it was 21 or 22, 21, I think. And it was a lot of really cool firsts we had with Coinberry. We were the first to facilitate the processing of tax payments made for the town of Innisfil. Really cool. Really was really cool
I
business.
remember
We
that.
grew it. Yeah, we grew it quite successfully. And we were actually going public We were taking the company public in, yeah, I guess it was 22. And then we got acquired with an acquisition offer come from Wondify, which was, I guess still is, affiliated with Kevin O'Leary. And so we ended up selling the business in early 23. In early 23, ended up selling Coinberry. I I took a little bit of time off. I joined the board of Wondify for a bit, after we sold. But fundamentally, like, I love building tech. I'm a tech guy at heart, and I love running businesses. So being on like the board of a public company isn't like wasn't exactly I wasn't really enjoying it. And I saw an opportunity. I saw an opportunity with lending. It was obvious to me that the trading, lending, and custody were the three sort of pillars of the financial industry that could be easily transposed to the crypto world. I did the trading part already with Coinberry, and so the idea of launching a regulated, compliant, safe, and secure lending business came and to me, and so in 23 we launched APX Lending. Approached and But the thing with APX, the vision was, Coinbase was very Canadian focused. The vision with APX was like, how do we build a global, compliant, leading lending business? And that's not offshore, that's not based in some whatever. Like, we're based in Toronto, in Canada, in one of the most highly respected and regulated financial environments in the world. And how do we build a successful global business with that in mind? And so what we did is, once again, we approached the OSC and we said, hey, listen, we have this novel idea of running one of the most secure and compliant lending platforms and businesses globally. How do we do that? How do we start in Canada? And luckily enough, it was the same folks that regulated and got my previous business, Coinberry, licensed. And so they were kind enough to sort of hear our pitch. And fast forward a year and a half later, we got licensed, or not licensed. We got approved, and received our exemptive relief from the OSC and the CSE to become the first approved crypto-backed lender in Canada last month in April of 2025. And so that was a year and a half long journey, but well worth it, I believe, in that it allows now Canadian businesses and Canadian retail borrowers the ability to borrow from a compliant, approved, safe and secure lending platform that is built on on sort of the pillar of taking a risk, an approach with risk mitigation in mind. And we do a lot of things that are very, very cool with Apex, very unique to the industry, and all of those things focus on how do we provide the most safe, secure, and compliant lending experience. So I can talk about some of those things. As an example, we looked at what made Celsius and BlockFi and all those companies fail in the past, and to me, one of the main reasons is the fact that they took client deposits, client collateral, right? So people borrow against their Bitcoin as an example, right? So they give the platform $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, they get a $50,000 loan, right? So they give up more Bitcoin than loan they got. That's the security that the lender has, right? In case you don't pay your loan back, I have your Bitcoin, I can sell it, and so I protect myself as a lender from default. But as a borrower, you're now in the situation where you've given me $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, you've only received 50 grand worth of loan. So, you're risking 50,000, right? Still. So how do we make sure that the borrower is the most protected? And if you look at, again, what, BlockFi and Celsius and those guys did that really kind of blew up, is they would take those deposits and they would reinvest them. They'd give them out to, hedge funds. They'd give them out to other prop trading firms. People would play around with that money, invest it. And then when the price drops, the collateral is not there anymore because it's all being lent out or invested in projects. And so the whole thing falls and the whole house of cards collapses. So when we were designing Apex, we thought to ourselves, and again, working with the regulators, obviously they were supportive of this approach. And that is, how do we make sure that at a business design level, we avoid any possibility that somebody's collateral gets lost or reinvested or something happens to it. And the way we went about it is we said, okay, number one, we do not reinvest collateral that our borrowers lend to us. We don't hypothecate it, we don't reinvest it. Number two, not only do we say that we don't do it, but we actually park it with a licensed custodian in insured cold storage wallets. And because it's segregated on a per loan basis, we can actually make it visible to our borrower for the duration of the loan. And it's not only visible on our platform, it's also visible on the blockchain because the wallet that they transfer the collateral into is the wallet they can just monitor themselves to make sure that we don't move it around. So it's not like we take everybody's collateral, we commingle everything into one big, bucket, and then nobody knows what's going on. And now we have to publish, some audit that is, I mean, maybe it's a true audit at the time that it was published in terms of where the funds are, but, a day later, who knows anymore. With us, there's no necessity for such audits because everything's transparent. So every borrower that we have on the platform can go on, on chain, and they can see where their collateral is, still sitting in the same wallet they deposited into. And that's a wallet with a, again, qualified, licensed insured custodian. And so, that approach, just from a business design perspective, is really what, one of the key attributes that we bring to the market, and one of the key elements that I think, came out of the lessons learned of the failures of the past. So that's sort of, my long story of how I ended up on the very, very sort of boring end of the crypto spectrum, but in, which is the super compliant, super safe, super risk mitigated, but fundamentally the type of businesses that I build, I think are in dire need within the crypto space, because until as an industry we start being able to answer to sort of mass market demands, and those mass market demands are compliance, our security, our safety, we won't be able to get mass adoption. And so, whether it's with Coinberry, which was, our goal there was to build the most, simple, safe, and secure, way to buy your first Bitcoin, or with Apex now, where our goal is to provide, again, the most simple, safe, and secure way to borrow against your Bitcoin once you've bought it. I think, it's my little sort of what I'd like to believe makes a change in this industry, and what we sort of believe in at Apex. And to be honest with you, the demand that we're seeing from our borrowers and like the positive feedback, we definitely have product market fit, and it's something that, our borrowers value, is our approach, and our philosophy
And
too.
which markets do you serve now, Andre? So you said Canada, obviously, but
Yeah, so
anything
we're in
outside of
Canada.
that?
Yeah, so we're in Canada. We're in the US as well. We are actively looking at expanding into Australia and New Zealand as well. We have a couple of partners there that we're in discussions with. We actually signed an MOU for a joint venture, to open, the the Australia New Zealand market. So we're hoping to start offering our services there, later this year, and looking quite actively at Europe and Asia as well. I mean, look, anybody globally, right? When they look at a company that's licensed or has, a regulatory oversight in, whether it's Canada or US, like these are very valued, um, and valuable regulatory regimes, and, globally. And so, as we expand further and further, like the product that we put out, the flexibility of the product, the safety and security aspect of it, and the regulatory frameworks we operate in, like it's a perfect storm, right, for anybody that's looking, for like an actual serious, lender to work with, going forward. And with Bitcoin and, Ethereum prices continuing to appreciate, less and less people are going to start, looking to sell. And the more ability they have to borrow with, like a trusted, player, the more it makes sense for them. Like it doesn't make sense to, go out and sell an asset class that's appreciating at 40, 60% year over year when you can borrow against it at, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Like it's an obvious choice, right?
What's your average loan size? Are you able to share that or?
Yeah, so it varies. It varies because we offer loans to both the retail and institution
Hmm.
clients. It varies. So like on the retail side, it could like we offer loans as low as $10,000. But I would say our average is probably around 100 on the retail side. But when you get into institutional players, like you're in the millions, obviously, because these are either companies that have Bitcoin on their balance sheet that are looking to, or the treasury that are looking to borrow against it, or miners that obviously are sitting on Bitcoin, they want to borrow against. One really cool product that we have. So we have our direct sort of to consumer lending platform, which is available at apxlending.com, where as a individual or as an institution, you can borrow against your Bitcoin, Ethereum. We give out loans up to 60% loan to value. So very high. We don't liquidate your loan until it hits 90% loan to value, which is really, really high. So we give you a lot of flexibility. I think we have some of the highest liquidation rates like globally. So that's really positive for borrowers because they have all that room to play with. And so I completely forgot the point I was trying to make.
That's all good. No, I was just asking about yeah, well, I think you kind of answered it there, but in terms of like
The size you were talking
yeah,
about.
the
Yeah.
size,
Yeah.
interesting. Hey, I got a question for you, Andre. So you're like so apples, maple syrup, Bitcoin trading, Bitcoin lending. When you're at the beginning of these like, kind of journeys, right, that you go upon, how do you evaluate whether an idea is good or bad? Are you like sitting and doing like SWOT analysis and putting together business plans? Are you talking to friends? Are you meditating? Like, what's
Yeah,
your
yeah, yeah.
process?
The way I go about it is, I mean, it's a combination of having a strong belief in the opportunity. Like you have to have conviction, right? At the end of the day, like a lot of this comes from a gut feeling because even with Apex as an example, like now we're getting to a point where we're like very doing very well, but it wasn't always like that. And we launched the company 2 years ago, and so for 2 years you have to grind it out. You really have to believe in what you're doing because you're going to be facing a lot of headwind, a lot of people that are skeptical. You're trying to raise funds, people are always skeptical, and people are always trying to tear down your idea, as they should, as a potential investors do. But you really have to have conviction. And so for me, it's a combination of seeking an opportunity, right? And testing it out a little bit, seeing if there's something to it. Like there has to be something to it. You have to have some positive feedback at the certain point in time, whether that's, selling apples, like obviously you go once if nobody's buying the damn apples, like you try selling pears, you don't just keep going back with the same apples. You know what I mean? As a kid. But then, you even with Coinberry as an example, we launched as an ATM business, but you pivot, right? We pivoted to an online brokerage, right? So with Apex, we launch as an online lending platform, but we have our white label solution. Like we offer our own tech that we built out as a white label to other like lenders, to other banks, credit unions, other fintechs. And as that side of the business is generating more and more demand, which it is right now, you always evaluate and you think, okay, do we need to like do you always like in the startup world? I mean, this, you always have to be able to pivot and look at information that's coming at you, and that's what makes it super exciting, right? So it's part anyway to answer your question in short, it's part gut feeling, part being a little bit crazy and just being like, I'm gonna go for this and I'm not gonna give up. I don't care what anybody says. And that's, I think, 90% of the success really that I've, from my perspective anyway, is just being this attitude of like, I will not give up. I don't care how hard it is. I don't care how many hours. Like I refuse to give up. I'll think of a new way to pivot, to change direction, to this, that, bring more investors. Like it doesn't matter. You just go at it with this very like, I don't care what happens. Like I am not giving up, and I will win just by being the last guy on the hill, if that's what it takes. And so that attitude has helped me, succeed fundamentally, because it is hard, man. It's super hard running a business of your own. Like I don't. Can I swear on this?
Yeah, sure.
No, but
Like,
you know what I mean. It's like It's fucking hard, dude. It's not easy. And, I mean, there's definitely benefits, like, you don't answer to yourself, except that you answer to your investors and you answer to your staff and you answer to your clients. So you're answering to everybody. So it's not like, to a certain point, it's like people think, oh, you're your own boss. You don't answer to anybody. And no, it's like you answer to everybody. It's even worse. But you do have, flexibility. And so, but with that flexibility comes the fact that you're flexibly always working 24/7. There's no such thing as weekends,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? But I wouldn't give it up for anything else. I think like for me, being able to creatively, um, just build, like for me, seeing a business that you've built up and tech that you built up actually start being used is such a sweet feeling. And like we
Mm.
experienced it with Coinberry when things were like ramping up, when we're experiencing now with Apex. Like it's such a nice like feeling, and it's just the high is so palatable because you've spent all this time, all this energy building out the tech, going through the regulatory process, like setting everything up. Like, we had to, we, like you mentioned earlier, we signed a $20 million, funding facility. Like
Hmm.
getting that across the finish line, it was the first time in Canada that
Mm.
a lending business got a funding facility of that size. So, getting that across the finish line, it's tremendously hard work, but it's so rewarding when you put the machine together and it starts working, and people actually start utilizing your service and they start taking out loans, and it's not just like friends of friends that do it. It's just random people that have come off the street. And then, that feeling to me is like worth more than anything else combined. Like that to me is where the fun of it all, really is.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Andre, I think we're getting like maybe 10 minutes here to the end of the interview. So when you and I met, it was a different time, right? I mean, you'd probably get uninvited from, family dinner parties for talking too much about Bitcoin, banking challenges, regulatory challenges. You got hackers after you. Your parents are probably shitting on you about your career choice. And then you zap over to today. You've got the BlackRocks and the Fidelities of the world going, hey, everyone should have 1% or whatever it is of their asset allocation towards Bitcoin. You've got the best performing stocks in the world, like MicroStrategy and Metaplanet, killing it, outperforming NVIDIAs of the world based on this Bitcoin strategy. You've got now the nation state of the United effing States, right? Like the president saying that he's going to hold Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset and it may be their path towards paying off their debts in the future. Juxtapose like 10 years ago versus today. Like what does it feel like? I mean, do you feel a bit vindicated in terms of, your career choice and
Yeah. It's interesting because on the one hand, I feel like, I if anybody asked me like 10 years ago where we'd be now, I would have imagined, to be honest with you, I would have imagined Bitcoin being a lot more adopted than it currently is. Like, legitimately speaking, I would have imagined everybody have switched over onto crypto, and like fiat's kind of like a collector's item at this point in time. So from that perspective, I think things are moving a little bit slower than I had anticipated them to. Is it positive that we're having these massive, big names supporting the industry? Yes, absolutely. I mean, no doubt about it. However, that being said, I mean, look, we deal a lot with, the financial, system, the legacy financial system. And what I think is unfortunate, especially in Canada, is how slow and how fundamentally, you know, unwelcoming, I would still say, the legacy financial system and the banks are towards, crypto businesses and the industry as a whole. And so I think what's going to end up happening, especially with the US taking a very, very aggressive pro approach towards crypto, is Canada is going to be left behind. I mean, we're already struggling on the, I mean, I think it's the GDP front. There's, uh, I believe I read a study somewhere recently, on the innovative, like how much innovation Canada is putting out per capita is also dropping. And so there's this industry that is clearly here to stay. It's clearly becoming If not already, then it's definitely to on the path to becoming a mainstay um, part of the financial reality that we live in. And I think as a country in Canada, we are falling behind. I mean, we are. We've got no coherent, um, you know, pro crypto sort of message coming down from the top, from the government level. As a matter of fact, I think the current PM, if I'm not mistaken, is quite disfavorable towards crypto. So I think that's definitely not going to help us as a country in Canada. And sometimes I look at what's happening in the US as it pertains to crypto, and I feel very envious. I mean, they have a really good thing going for them right now, and I think they're going to really establish themselves as like the dominant player. And this is something that's going to have an effect on generations to come. Like this isn't something that is going to go away in the next 20 years. Like this is a generational shift in the way society functions from a financial, I think, and value the movement of value perspective. And so, yeah, I mean, to put it short, am I excited or do I feel vindicated? Yes. I mean, obviously, we're moving in the right direction. I had hoped that we would have moved further, and I definitely think, as a country in Canada here, we need to do a lot more to really make sure we're not left behind in a world that's changing and moving very quickly. I'll end with this anecdote, and there's a more and more companies, especially in the MENA region, are settling, not have nothing to do with crypto, but are settling international trade large. I mean, we're talking about $100 million deals in stablecoins. I mean, that's the reality. They're using stablecoins now to pay for large shipments of iron ore. Are we even
Interesting.
aware of that in Canada? Is anybody talking about the changing world that's out there?
Mm,
No, nobody is. And I mean, we have exposure to it, you and I, maybe because we're deep in this.
mm.
But this is like the world is changing out there. And the more, the more reserved we remain as a country, as regulators, as sort of government towards crypto, the more we're going to be left behind. That's just a reality. That's a fact. We're going to be left behind. We're just going to keep being left behind more and more and more and more. Not to end this on a
So
sad
no,
note.
no, I was gonna say, so just to finish it up on a positive note, why don't you share with us 5 years from now? Where does Apex Lending? What's your vision? And how do you see Apex Lending, kind of supporting the whole Bitcoin adoption narrative?
Yeah, yeah, man. So I mean, look, we build out Apex with a global vision in mind. We have a phenomenal white label solution that we offer to all financial institutions that are looking to get into crypto-backed lending. And my belief is sooner rather than later, the legacy financial institutions, the banks, the credit unions, they are going to start offering crypto trading services, crypto-backed lending, and potentially custody of crypto. And so our vision for Apex is to not compete with all these entities in 5 years, but rather to power them and to provide them the infrastructure and the technology they need to offer the crypto-backed lending services portion of that sort of gambit of crypto services that inevitably they will offer. So that's our vision for Apex, is to really power the crypto-backed lending infrastructure layer globally over the next 5 to 10 years.
Awesome. I love that, man. So maybe just tell people real quickly, I don't know, your Twitter handle, your website, things like that. So if they want to learn more or, get a Bitcoin loan, they can do so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if you head over to www.apxlending.com, you'll get all our information there, all our social media, handles, all of that. But that's www.apxlending.com.
Are you on Twitter?
I
A little
am
bit?
not a little bit. Yeah, I'm still working on my social media profile. I think if I'm not mistaken, my Twitter handle is The real Andre, I think it's the real Andrei Poliakov. I have to get back to
It's all
you on
good. I can find it and put it in the show notes. But
that.
dude, you're a true inspiration, multiple time entrepreneur in this space. I mean, there aren't many of us in Canada here. The fact that you've exited, it's just started from humble beginnings, selling apples all the way up to, building a global Bitcoin lending empire. So it makes me really proud and happy to see, be a witness to your journey here. And yeah, let's bring this one to a close if we're good.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, man. And likewise, it's wonderful to see you. You've been one of the sort of the pillars in Canada with this space. Probably before I got even involved. So it's you're an OG, man. It's an honor to be on the show.
Awesome. All right, sounds good, man. I'm gonna bring this one to a close and just hold on for 1 second, Andre.